I've been on the front lines of trying to get, merchant adoption going. And the truth is, in that most developed countries, at least, people don't have a very strong desire to switch what form of money they want to use, because there isn't a really big need for it, unless you try to explain to them monetary theory and the evils of central banks. But that's a difficult thing to convince someone of, instead of presenting them an application that is really useful for them to use.
This week on Monero Talk is sponsored by Cake Wallet. Store, send, receive, and exchange your Monero and Bitcoin safely on iOS and Android too. Cake Wallet is open source, and you always control your own keys. And by Stealth EX, an instant exchange where privacy is the top concern. Go to stealthex.io to instantly exchange between Monero and 450 plus assets without having to create an account or register, and with no limits. Making Stealth EX a simple way to purchase Monero with crypto anonymously. Monero Talk is also made possible from contributions by viewers and listeners like you. And supporting us is easier than ever. By typing in monerotalk.crypto in your monero.com or Cake Wallet send address field to send us a tip. This week on Monero Talk, Douglas Tuman interviews Justin Bons, a crypto researcher and investor, and founder of Europe's oldest cryptocurrency fund, Capital B.V. The two discuss Justin's background, how his initial take on crypto evolved, the power of proof of work, separation of the monetary system and the state, which utility is more important for adoption, digital cash or store of value, his critiques of Monero, why he thinks BTC is destined to fail, and much more. Monero Talk starts now.
All right, Justin, welcome to Monero Talk, man.
Welcome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, are you familiar with Monero Talk? Have you ever come across our stuff? I'm just curious how good a job we're doing, or
I'm gonna have to be honest. I haven't spent a lot of time listening to this podcast, but there's a lot of great podcasts that I'm missing out on all the time. So please don't take it personally.
No, absolutely not, man. There's way too much information out there and way too little time, right? You got to be careful with where you allocate your time these days, more than ever.
Indeed. But I have found sometimes I've actually spoken on podcasts. I'm like, oh, that's a really good podcast. And then I start listening to it because I am a pretty avid podcast listener. It's a great way to just, learn on the move while doing things,
Yeah, maybe we have one of those moments here. Do you have a podcast as well? I know I don't actually. Interviewed quite often.
I don't. I've been mainly just on other people's shows for the most part, and that's worked out for me so far. I do a Spaces every so often, but that's not quite the same, obviously.
Yeah. If you don't mind, if you could quickly kind of give an intro of yourself, like who is Justin Bons?
Sure. If you hear background noise there, that's my cat. Unfortunately, he's trying to get in, but I don't want him to mess up all my equipment here.
No worries.
Yes, so sorry about that. Sorry, it's a little bit distracting. So I've been a cryptocurrency researcher for about a decade now. Been full-time working in this space, and as part of that, I also set up a investment fund.
Wow.
And the investment fund is very much focused on fundamental analysis. So we're really, trying to make long-term investments based on really the underlying merits of a cryptocurrency, and also understanding and I think maybe thinking a lot about some of the big questions in the space, some of the big debates. And I think, how you answer those questions, I think can say a lot about a good long-term investment portfolio. So I think of myself primarily as a researcher, but I suppose I'm also, a investor as well, and a critic.
Did you have a background in this area before you got, actually started looking at crypto? Were you, a dev? Were you a finance guy? Were you a liberty-loving money guy? Like, what was kind of your background before you even found crypto?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have a background in the humanities. So maybe liberty money guy, if you will, but I went a little bit deeper than that. I actually have a background in political philosophy and history. And
Awesome.
and that's not necessarily the obvious choice for, being a researcher in this space, but I actually found it fills a particular void, I think, in terms of expertise. And especially when I first got involved in cryptocurrency around the time of the block size debates, I found that the question started to revolve around, how do we decide? And I felt that was really in the purview of political thinking and philosophy, and philosophy obviously allows me to think critically as well. And I think that's very, very useful.
I'm surprised to hear. I mean, obviously, I'm not surprised for that aspect of it, right? You certainly bring that to your discussion, but you also seem to have a very good handle on the technicals, which is not easy.
Thank you. No, I have always. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, where does that skill come from? Is that just something you've had innately?
Well, I've always been a fairly technical person, but I was never a computer scientist or a coder or anything like that. I've always liked to work with hardware and computers and think about these sort of things. But I think having been doing this for 10 years full time as a researcher, and also having computer scientists inside of the research team as well, and spending a lot of my time learning about these things, I think that's just something I've gained over time. And I also find that, at least in terms of my background, in terms of how I look at cryptocurrencies, I need to understand what the rules are and what the impacts of those rules are. I don't necessarily need to know, the finer detail of how that's implemented or how that's coded. I just need to know, or at least have confidence in that it works in a particular way.
I think we're similar in that respect. And I think we also got in around, started looking at this around the same 2013, 2014, right? Early 2014 is when you really started taking a close look.
Yeah.
What was your initial, if you could kind of go back to that time, what was your initial take on crypto? And has it evolved since then in terms of, what you thought the value proposition was when you first started to really understand this? Has that evolved? And what was it originally?
No, sure. No, I'd love to get into that. I think it has evolved, and it hasn't in some ways. I think initially, I think I actually first came across cryptocurrency around 2011 or 12, and I somewhat rejected it, not really understanding enough about it. I'm like, okay, no, this is a scam.
Yeah.
And then I came across it later, and it was explained to me a bit better, especially how proof of work works. Actually, it was actually a key element to understanding that the system actually made sense, and then it really grabbed my attention. And then I was like, wow, this is actually what I've been looking for a long time. It's a very powerful technological tool that also allows us to do new things politically and economically. And I think for me, and also being more on the libertarian side of things as well, and thinking that, the idea of the separation of the monetary power from the state, of that actually being a fairly good idea, analogous to the separation of church and state, right, historically. That I felt like that was the big idea that I think I really fell in love with, and censorship resistance and privacy and immutability and credible neutrality and all of these wonderful attributes, and I should say economic freedom, and all of these wonderful attributes is what I really fell in love with. So I suppose I was part of that libertarian wave. I think there's different waves of, and I think we might have that in common then, different waves of demographics that came into cryptocurrency at different times. And you're not bound to it, but there is a statistical average there.
You're not from the 2017 number go up class. You're the earlier libertarian class.
Yeah.
So what would you describe as the value proposition of crypto? Like, what was the breakthrough? What can we do with cryptocurrency that we weren't able to do before? It's this separation of money and state, or how would you?
Well, I think so there's multiple dimensions to this. And this is one of the things that makes cryptocurrency so interesting. Because some people want to say, no, cryptocurrency is a store of value, right? And some people say, no, cryptocurrency is a digital cash. And I think it's very important to understand that it's actually both of these things, and that it needs to serve as both of these things. It's part of what makes it so economically profound and useful as well, because a good medium of exchange also serves well, also being a good store of value. On top of that, I would also add that I would say three things primarily. So digital cash, or money, if you will, a store of value. And the third thing is also it should serve as a platform for decentralized applications. And that's those three aspects of a cryptocurrency is what I think it should be able to do in the broadest sense of the word. And that's to me is really the goal.
And do you see different cryptos serving those different use cases, or one cryptocurrency will do all those things well and will need to do all those things for it to truly be a winning cryptocurrency?
Yeah, I'm of the what still seems to be a controversial position, that I think at least when we're talking about a base layer cryptocurrency, a layer one cryptocurrency such as Monero, such as Ethereum, such as Bitcoin, I think they all need to be able to do all three in a single network, because I think it's technologically possible to do that. And if it's technologically possible, while preserving decentralization, of course, then I think it's desirable. And that's why I also refuse to say put Bitcoin and Ethereum into separate categories, because I think that's a way of really escaping the competition, so to speak.
Yeah, we look at things very similarly. I think you more so from an Ethereum perspective, me from a Monero perspective, but both viewing the space very similarly. Although something like with Monero, I think, the focus is on the digital cash utility aspect of it. And then maybe those other things, naturally arrive organically as the protocol evolves. Do you look at it that way at all? Like it needs to do, digital cash correct first, and then do these other things, then become a store of value, then start, getting fancy with smart contracts, or you see them kind of all happening together at once?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think up till now, I think we are in full agreement, having been part of that 2013 wave, if you will. But I think maybe here is where I divert a bit, and as my thinking has evolved. I used to think digital cash was really the primary use case. I still think it is, actually. I would still say digital cash or money. I still think that is the main use case. But I'm not necessarily convinced anymore that is how that's necessarily the path to adoption. I'm starting to think, or I have thought for a while, that actually things like smart contracts and a lot of the things we see in DeFi are attracting a lot of adoption, and a lot of things like DAOs and all of these sort of things, that these sort of things will bring adoption and will bring people to the network, and give it more use cases that are more compelling now. So I'm starting to think actually that is how that will come first, and then the money, it being widely adopted as money, will come later. I've been on the front lines of trying to get merchant adoption going, and the truth is, in that most developed countries, at least, people don't have a very strong desire to switch what form of money they want to use, because there isn't a really big need for it, unless you try to explain to them monetary theory and the evils of central banks. But that's a difficult thing to convince someone of, instead of presenting them an application that is really useful for them to use. And I know I'm on Monero Talks right now, and there's no touring complete.
No, my blood pressure is starting to go up a little bit as
and I'll just caveat as well. I actually think Monero is really cool, and I love what you guys are doing for privacy. But and no cryptocurrency is perfect. I mean, I'm also have become more critical over time of even Ethereum itself as well. And I think all cryptocurrencies, when I look at them, are missing certain features, and some have some, and some others have others. And so yeah, I would love to see Monero implement something like that in the future. And I wouldn't say that is beyond impossible for that to happen. Though, I mean, convincing the wider community, of course, would be the greater challenge there.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting to hear. So now you make more sense to me as to what you represent. So you do see it like these dApps being really what drives adoption. And then, a money use case maybe evolves from that, because there isn't this great need to go use a cryptocurrency when you can use your credit card, when you can use Venmo. There's not like this 10x increase in usability when you move over to a crypto. But this is where I would start to diverge as well. I would like to get your opinion. So how about Monero focusing on being digital cash first has seen organic adoption take place in areas where there is really that 10x increase in usability or value, right? So like if you're on a dark market and you're a vendor, it makes all the sense in the world to use Monero to buy things and to use Monero for purposes of receiving payments as a vendor, because you get a lot from that in terms of value, right? There's less chance that perhaps a state can catch you, can take away your Monero, can put you in jail for participating in free and open commerce, right? Whether or not you agree with what they're doing, there is that real need that's met with Monero. How do you look at that? Do you just see that maybe just that then as a niche thing that doesn't grow that doesn't gain larger traction? I'm curious how you view that.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I would see it as more of a niche thing, not to downgrade it all, because I think it's really cool. Like it's also really it's serving a really important purpose. There's been a bit of controversy around in the Netherlands recently with one of the Tornado Cash developers being put in jail here, and 6 months later we still don't have clear charges against what they've done there. So I think Monero is serving a really important purpose and serving people in a wonderful way. And if that's all it does, then that's great and fine. And I think that's wonderful. But I think that's a niche, and I think to grow larger than that niche, I think having things like dApps, I think would be very would help bring more adoption to Monero, I think. And there's a bunch of different interesting aspects to Monero's design that maybe I'd love to talk to you about as well. But
yeah, definitely. We'll get into it. We could jump over to, basically the big question. Why, this is where I think maybe we agree most. Why is Bitcoin destined to fail? Which is, a bold statement.
Sure.
I try not to say it too much, because I think, you quickly can lose credibility among a lot of people where they're like, well, if this, I'm not going to listen to this guy. He doesn't even think Bitcoin is here to stay. Ultimately, I do agree with you on basically your take on Bitcoin and where it is failing and how that could lead to it essentially becoming irrelevant. But let's hear it from you.
Sure.
You express it so well.
No, thanks. Let's not. I've discussed this ad nauseum on a lot of other platforms as well. So I think it'll be more fun to discuss Monero and some.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Let's hear that.
But I will give it the short version. In regards to what you said, though, in terms of losing credibility, in my eyes, people that say that, at least most people that think that Bitcoin is the best thing ever, lose a bit of credibility in my eyes. So there's a perspective thing there.
I agree.
So I think that the long-term security, well, there's a bunch of problems with Bitcoin. I think it lacks capacity for a start. And this is all the result of the block size period of the block size debates, where Bitcoin was very dramatically changed by not increasing the block size limit, as was initially planned and laid out by Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder. And this very much perverted the economic model and security model of Bitcoin. And this is because of the halvening. So every 4 years, inflation halves. And over time, that means less and less Bitcoin is actually being sent out to support mining, and that's what supports the security of the network, of course. So that means that either price needs to continue to double in order to maintain security, or network security basically becomes so low that the network will, can be attacked basically, or is even profitable to attack, in which case I would expect it to happen. And in terms of that alternative scenario of Bitcoin continuously doubling, I really would question someone's understanding of economics in that case, because in less than 30 years, Bitcoin exceeds global GDP. And if it then has to continue to double for every 4 years, and if you understand how exponential functions work, then you'd soon come to the realization that that is just completely impossible. So in that sense, Bitcoin's original design was brilliant, and I could see how it could have worked. But in its current configuration, I think that its security budget will run out between 7 to 11 years. And I also think it lacks a lot of innovation, a lot of the features, and the capacity and all of this to really compete in the long run. And therefore, I don't think it will also gather enough fees either to maintain security. So that is it in one brief. I think I did okay with the summary there.
Yeah, you did. And is that really a product, you think, of kind of the culture of Bitcoin, or is it a technological problem?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately a problem of governance, which I would love to discuss Monero governance with you later on. I think that would be fascinating. Sure. But I think it's a product of the governance. And the governance is also partially a product of the culture, and the culture is also partially a product of the governance. So these two things are somewhat feeding back into each other, being self-reinforcing even to a certain extent. And I think that the makeup of people in the Bitcoin community, or the really serious people, or the connected inside it people, that there was a very large divide that happened during the block size debate, and that made the people that are in Bitcoin and supporting it today, at least in a more significant level, very monogamous. Oh, I'm not saying that word right.
Monogamous?
No, not monogamous. It's all the same. Anyway.
Oh, homogeneous?
Homogeneous. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Thank you. And then that you have a very similar group, and then you combine that with a very high degree of censorship, and a very high selection bias. But ultimately, I think the governance is not capable really of making the changes needed in time. And that's partially a result of politics, which are the people, the governance, which are the mechanisms, right? And also the culture.
So do you think it was that, it was co-opted by a group of people that, the kind of the conspiracy, that wanted to move Bitcoin tech to layer 2 so they can really, at the end of the day, control it in kind of a fiat manner, as opposed to letting it naturally evolve on layer 1. And that's where the real impetus was. That's where how we got to where we are, is because this group kind of came in, took over, and then using the power and influence they gained along the way, were able to continue along that path.
That's certainly possible. I would say that's technically a conspiracy theory, and I think there are conspiracies in the world, and we can't completely prove that. But what we can prove, and what we can know with certainty, is that there's a clear conflict of interest, right, between Bitcoin Core and companies such as Blockstream and Chaincode Labs, and maybe a few others, where these companies are developing for-profit layer 2 solutions. And I think that creates a direct disincentive to actually support scaling the layer 1 blockchain layer. So I think what we can show and what we can prove is that there is a conflict of interest there. And furthermore, that also as a result of the block size debates, a lot of the development is extremely centralized. There's basically just one Bitcoin Core client, and any competition to that client is culturally basically seen as an attack on Bitcoin. So that creates an environment where I believe it's effectively just a one-party system. Because I do believe that having multiple client implementations is actually absolutely critical if you're, hoping to achieve some form of decentralized governance.
But does that necessarily lead to failure, or does it lead to just some equilibrium where you have this system that maybe isn't as decentralized as originally hoped for, but it's kind of this federated monster that exists that people are all agreeing to store their value in, even though it doesn't really have a base utility of, a decentralized, censorship-resistant network, but it's kind of like collectively they've all said, we're going to store our value here, and then it just kind of in perpetuity lasts, just like a religion or something else.
Sure. I mean, if I were really to be specific, I think what it leads to is that the system becomes captured by a small number of individuals, and then the question is, what is effectively, I think, a dictatorship, because you have a single lead maintainer having the final say over all decisions, right? If you say, only Bitcoin Core, right? But
does Bitcoin then go away after that, or it's just all these people are like, yeah, it's captured, but at least the number just keeps going up, even though it's basically essentially controlled by the state at this point,
right? Or controlled by this small cabal of people that basically have the power to gatekeep any rule changes, right? I mean, within limits, right? Because even dictatorships have limits, right? So I think this analogy still, works out. The result of that, now here comes the question. The question becomes, are they going to make the best decisions for the network, right? And we can compare this also to, real world dictatorships, right? Do dictatorships that have a clear conflict of interest, let's say, do they usually have the best interest of the network or the people or the country at hand, if you will? Usually not, right?
No, yeah.
Usually that ends up being a disaster.
It's their own power and own wealth that they're.
You can roll the dice on that. It's a bit like monarchies, right? Like if you have a good monarch, then oh wow, things are great, and then the next one comes along, and chances are the next monarch isn't that good, right? So I think that's somewhat the problem. So. And the question is, okay, what decisions are they making? And I think, yes, in your scenario, people could just believe in it and the number could just keep going up. And that could happen to anything in the world, right? It's not, if you're really thinking about this in terms of investment or really predicting the future, then, something that is centrally controlled effectively and something that has really lackluster economic attributes or security attributes, just competitively, I don't think that can go up forever. I mean, if the security model was functional, by the way, in the way that Monero is, I might as well add this here. This problem that Bitcoin has about the and this, of course, for your audience, the problem is when the supply runs out in Bitcoin, right? Monero obviously has a tail inflation, so it can just indefinitely remain secure. It's a very simple solution, but it absolutely works. So that's the thing where I would say, well, there's a limit to that, because if people just keep believing in it and keep believing the false narratives and my number keeps going up, right? But at a certain point, it's going to hit a wall, right? And when it hits that wall, I can't imagine people still sticking with it in the way that they do. If the network is literally just insecure and double spends are occurring, and you have to wait for 1,000 confirmations.
And do you think there'll be some moment too? Maybe the catalyst will be when they have to make the hard decision of potentially adding a tail emission, and that's where things will start to bifurcate, and Bitcoin kind of splits once again, and you have 21 million Bitcoin that isn't as secure as tail emission Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's spot on. That's what will happen. So, I've been through a number of big blockchain civil wars, and I've seen multiple splits, and I've seen how this happens. And what will happen is I don't know how many years from now, but there will be a split where part says we have to ditch the 21 million limit, and another group says never. And one will be insecure with a 21 million limit, and the other one will be secure without a 21 million limit. But I just don't think that that's a bright future, because just really throws a spanner in the works of that narrative that people are being told. It really goes against, I think, what a lot of people believe. So I think that's, and also when we're comparing this now to systems like, what I really like, and again, if I don't think Monero doesn't have fee burning, if I'm correct, right? There's no fee burning mechanism.
Fee burning? No, where you mean coins just get locked up, burnt for what purpose you're saying?
Yeah. So I would highly recommend that Monero does this as well, because I think it's absolutely brilliant. And that's one thing that is an innovation that happened in Ethereum, where I really think in terms of the economic design, they were really spot on. And as far as I'm concerned, I think all blockchains should adopt this. So basically you have a small tail inflation like Monero has. And then you also say burn 50% of the fees. And if you burn 50% of the fees, if there's a high amount of fees, then actually the amount burnt can actually exceed the inflation rate. So then you actually have negative inflation. You actually have a shrinking supply. So now you have an algorithmically determined supply that during periods of low economic activity, there's a small amount of inflation. It keeps it secure. And during high amounts of economic activity, you actually have a shrinking supply, which then adds to the value proposition of the cryptocurrency. That, in my view, I think is the really superior design. And Monero is already halfway there with the tail inflation.
Yeah,
which is much harder to add.
I mean, well, one, you have coin loss, right? So there's studies where people have kind of, like, I think even Peter Todd kind of looked at this and said effectively something like a Monero with the tail emission probably is losing more coins than what's being added via its tail emission over time. I think that's fair to say, especially as it's being used more and is actually transacted, right? So it's not a meme of hold your Monero and never use it. It's move it around and transact as much as possible, which is certainly going to lead to a lot of people losing coins along the way. There's that, just to throw that out there. I mean, I think that's a very real thing.
It's fair. It's a fair argument. I think Peter Todd overstated the numbers a bit, but irregardless, it's still a fair argument. And I do think, though, that the fee burning model, though, is more tangible. You can see the supply being reduced. It's just more attractive to investors, I would say.
Yeah, and I imagine there'll be other things in the future where people are locking up their Monero for certain reasons, and it's just those things haven't been added yet, right? Like, so they're just concentrating on digital cash.
Yeah.
Trying to think where I wanted to head with this. So
I'm curious about governance. Actually, I would love to ask you, because I haven't spent a lot of time researching Monero specifically recently, but I actually used to be much deeper into Monero, so I'm not sure exactly where the design stands now and where certain things stand. I remember I'm not sure if Fluffy Pony is still part of the community or.
Yeah, I mean, he was the lead maintainer for some time, and then he passed it on to somebody else, and now now it's somebody else. So it's very similar to to Bitcoin in that respect.
Yeah, because I had some really interesting discussions before Fluffy Pony years ago around Monero governance, and the way that I viewed Monero governance is, and you just nailed the nail on the head, is I've always felt like Monero governance is basically Bitcoin governance, but you're honest about it.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more open and transparent in terms of getting feedback from the community. I think this is when I had asked you that original question, is it the issue with Bitcoin? Is it a cultural issue or technological? I think Monero's done a very good job at creating a cohesive culture where 99.9% of the people involved in Monero and are using Monero know what Monero is meant to be and are on board for that, which is digital cash, right? So because you have this whereas in Bitcoin, it's a store of value or it's digital, like it's not, there isn't this cohesive vision. And in Monero there is. So when a design decision needs to be made, everybody is kind of looking at it from the same vantage point of, will this help us towards the goal of creating fungible, censorship resistant, untraceable digital cash? And so because everybody has that same goal in mind, when various issues and design decisions are made, everybody's kind of weighing it from that degree. And then there may be arguments as opposed to which leads to that more effectively. But usually most people end up aligning as to where that design decision should be made. Right now, I don't know if you're familiar with Transaction Extra. It's a component of Monero where extra data can be added into a transaction for purposes of, originally it was there for was something called payment IDs. So with Monero, it's difficult, right? Because it's untraceable, especially in the early days with exchanges. You'd send your Monero to an exchange, and exchange didn't have any easy way of associating the user with the Monero. So you had to attach a payment ID to it.
So is this similar to the view key, or is that different?
View key is a way to give people allow people to essentially view your transactions, right? View your history without having access to your private key. This is just a way to send some extra data along with the Monero transaction. But with the hope that it wouldn't be used for other things, right? Because the worry is if it starts to be used in ways that aren't desirable, it could potentially make Monero less fungible, right? As you can imagine, right? Without going to the technicals, but perhaps it could lead to ways where you could distinguish some transactions from others based on the data that's added in the transaction extra field. So there's this big debate that's going on, but what you're seeing is everybody's kind of on board with, let's do whatever we need to do to make sure Monero maintains its fungibility. So at the end of the day, the governance, it's the devs coming to consensus on what to be done, but it's in a very open source, false manner. It's spoken about and debated, and then decisions are made. And then I think there's evidence of the fact that that works out well because you haven't seen a contentious fork in Monero, and Monero forks. It updates. We like to call them upgrades. It was doing it every 6 months. Now it's over maybe a year and a half, even 2 years. And we've yet to see a really contentious fork of any kind. Everybody kind of gets on board with, the direction.
I really love how you guys are sticking it to that soft fork BTC narrative, by the way. I think that's great.
Right. This whole idea that you have to ossify, right? I think in Monero, part of the culture is, no, you have to evolve because, it's a constant battle and we haven't won yet. We don't have a perfect tech that can't be tracked and traced yet. It's a constant battle versus those that are trying to track and trace the crypto.
There's a few things to unpack here.
Sure.
In terms of the governance, I think all cryptocurrencies start out centralized. Like they all start that way, and they somewhat need to, and then you're still highly dependent on a group of people, and I think that's fine. But I think at some point you need to go through that process of decentralizing and more and on some more fundamental levels. So I think, and I'm glad the Monero community is so cohesive, and I understand that that's working today. And it sounds like you have a very admirable type of, GitHub process happening here. And I think that's great. But I do think that at scale, that type of governance is too vulnerable to capture. And I think at scale, you really need to have multiple competing implementations. And ideally, you have some sort of on-chain governance mechanism to then to then maybe make that a deciding factor, right? Because in democracies, right, every time we have an election, we don't have a civil war and split countries apart. Right. That's because we generally agree with the process of decision making. Mm-hmm. So what you need is a process of decision making that's outside of that is outside of the actual GitHub or client implementation level. And I think at scale you're going to need that, or else it's just far too vulnerable for someone to come along and start. Here's a scenario: start bribing. With a lot of money, some of the developers up top, right? And maybe these developers now are honest, but maybe the next round, might be tempted by something like that, right? And I think that's a real danger that you need to start to think about when you start moving into kind of a greater scale and a greater importance in the world, especially if something like Monero.
Yeah, I mean,
really
I would say
maintain
we
that
even kind of
functionality.
already saw an example of that with when Monero went to being ASIC resistant, right? Well, it was always trying to be resistant to ASICs, but there was, when it updated its proof of work to random X, there was this moment of, do we want to do this, or does Monero do ASICs? Is ASICs an inevitable thing, and is it not worth fighting? And obviously, there are those that stood to benefit greatly from an ASIC Monero, right? But once again, culturally, it was overcome. Fluffy Pony, even being on the side of against implementing random X, was overcome by the community. And once again, this idea of let's create the most censorship resistant, permissionless crypto possible. And so striving for one CPU, one vote, one out the potential for others to benefit greatly if we went the ASIC route.
Right.
But I agree with you. I mean, I guess Monero, is just hasn't gotten there yet. I guess you would say, well, you need to start planning now. And yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have. You should come hang out with the Monero devs in the rooms, in the chats, and throw it out there. Monero is very open and malleable to discussing these things.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be a great debate to be had about the future governance of Monero.
And and the community now is cohesive, right? But if Monero does get a huge wave of adoption, say 10 times the number of people get into Monero and get involved, those people might not have the same viewpoints, that the current Monero people have. And that's something you saw in the different waves of people coming into cryptocurrency that we discussed earlier as well. And I think it's at that scale that, and I acknowledge that it's working now, right? But my critique here is really more one of, well, at scale, this type of system is vulnerable to manipulation, to politics, to bribery, to corruption, to conflicts of interest. And you really want to counter for that before you get to a point where, nefarious actors attempt to capture. And it sounds like you had somewhat of you're somewhat able to kick out bad actors. I don't know the full story of what you described before. But it's
it wasn't so much of bad actors, but there were those that potentially stood to benefit financially. I think if it went the more ASIC friendly route.
Well, that's the conflict of interest story again,
but
right?
The ethos of true digital cash prevailed.
Yeah.
So that's why I say, it's not just me. I think there's something really there with creating this strong, cohesive ethos.
I think that's key. And I think what you're describing is also that's the social contract, right? I recently wrote an article about governance, and I described 6 principles of good blockchain governance. And one of those principles was right at the end, but one of those principles was social contract. So you need a strong social contract in place, which kind of creates the expectations. I think Monero is a great example of that in terms of the ASIC resistance questions, right? I think no one's going to develop ASICs for Monero now because the social contract is in place. As soon as someone does, you're going to switch the mining algorithm over. And I think that is pretty brilliant and pretty cool. It does democratize proof of work more. Right, ASICs, do lead to much fiercer economies of scale, and gates keep a lot of access, right? But I mean, I think that in the case of Monero, I really am of the thorough belief, and so it's something I've given a lot of thought. But I think the way that would look like in Monero is usually I advocate for proof of stake, stakeholder based voting, that might not jive as well with the Monero community, I suspect. So maybe you could do some sort of variation of proof of work voting as well, right? I think that's the type of thing you do in order to say, I mean, if you don't have that, you just have Nakamoto consensus, right?
Right.
And that's the idea, and that's what Bitcoin has. It says, well, if you don't agree, you can just fork off, right? But I think that has its limitations.
love coffee and Monero as much as we do? Consider making gratuitous.org your daily cup. Pay with Monero for premium fresh beans, and if you like what you taste, send a digital cash tip directly to the Guatemalan farmers that made it possible. Proceeds help us grow this channel, Gratuitous, and Monero.
Yeah, totally agree. So would that be your largest criticism of Monero? What are your criticisms of Monero?
You're asking for. Now I'm gonna feel bad, but I think you'll see these coming.
This once again. This is the ethos of Monero. We self-criticize all the time, man.
Sure. Okay. Glad to hear. It's somewhat of you could say a list of requirements of what I want to see out of a modern cryptocurrency, and I can lay out how I see that. So I think that, well, specific to Monero, I actually think that optional privacy is important. But what you just described, I know.
I know. I'll put that on the list. Okay.
You know what? Actually, let me dwell on that for a moment, because I understood from you that's maybe a little bit of a debate in the community now. So that could be an interesting thing for me to weigh in on and maybe throw a wrench in your unity just a little bit.
Please try.
So I think that optional privacy is really important, because I think that it's important for private individuals to have to be able to have privacy, right? That privacy being a human right, actually. It's also like really important for free thought. If you feel like you're always being monitored, you can't think freely. And that's another reason why I think privacy is really so critical in the formation of an individual and a human being. Okay. But on the other hand, I also want things like institutions and charities and government agencies, as far as we need them, to actually also have, a degree of like transparency. So that's where I see like two sides of blockchain is, one, you can enforce transparency on certain institutions and individuals and private enterprises. Some private enterprises can really have good privacy. I think Monero somewhat achieves that because of the use of the view key and the transaction ID.
In that regard, 100%. I don't think people in Monero are opposed of a way to show your transaction history if you want to, but there's great opposition to this idea of something like a Zcash, where you can send a transparent transaction versus one that is obfuscated. And the primary reason for that, obviously, privacy is a human right. I go off on rants all the time, the importance of that, especially in the digital age. But just for money purposes, once again, to the fungibility aspect of money, right? So if you don't want histories being attached to transactions, you're going to need every transaction to essentially look the same. And if you start to have opt-in privacy, now some transactions are traceable, others are not, and you're deteriorating the fungibility of the protocol would be the primary argument against that.
But you're giving people the option. And as long as you don't, degrade the anonymity set too much by doing that, I overall think that that's a positive. Just giving people that freedom. And
but why would you want that versus something like a view key, where I could essentially, right? And that is similar, right? It's just instead of default being able to send a transparent transaction, I'm instead giving you access on request to see into my transaction history. So government using Monero would publish their view keys, and the citizens would be able to see all the transactions going in and out of that wallet. I must say, though, Monero's transaction keys, view keys, aren't even at that stage yet. They're being developed to truly do that. Right now, they don't actually even fully do that. But Monero community certainly isn't against a true, fully viewable view key, where you could see all transactions going in and out of a wallet upon request. Here's my view key. Here you go, Uncle Sam. Take a look. You can look at the wallet.
It sounds like the transaction ID is just a more granular version of that, though. So that, to me, would maybe, instead of revealing your whole address, you're just revealing this one transaction. Or am I mistaken on how that works?
No, the view key is you're viewing into a wallet, right? So I'm not giving you my private key, but I'm giving you something where you can now look at the wallet and see all transactions going in and out of it. Which, like I said, right now, that actually the view key in Monero actually isn't up to that, hasn't gotten that far. You can't see all transactions in and out. You can only see transactions coming in, but they're evolving in that direction. Once they add Seraphis, the view keys will be more capable and will essentially be able to do that. So would that fulfill your need there?
Yes, it does. Okay. It does. Yes. It does fulfill. And I'll actually provide an example, because this is something with my company. As an investment fund, right, which is registered with the Dutch financial authorities and has a fund administrator that needs to monitor all of our financial transactions, right? And that we do full KYC and AML on any investors coming in. And we need to be able to identify our counterparty, right? In order to do that, we need something like a view key if, say, the fund I manage invests in Monero, because that then provides the transparency and the added security that we're being monitored by third parties and this and that. To the investor, like, and in that framing, you can see how it's a positive, and then more institutional investors are also able to invest in something like Monero as well. So I just want to praise the idea of a view key here. In case any developer gets it in his head to remove the
And I would say view key okay, but optional privacy I would kind of categorize. My understanding is a different concept, more of like a Zcash.
Right.
You send a transaction. Do you want this transaction to be obfuscated, or do you want it to be fundamentally transparent, the actual transaction?
No, I understand. So in that distinction, I would agree with you. So for me, what I meant with optional privacy is just what the view key is already able to do. And this transaction ID sounds pretty decent as idea to me as well. But it'll be an interesting debate within your community.
What's the next Monero critique?
Okay, right. So we're on the critiques. I'm glad you brought me back on the focus, because this is a good one. So as you can probably already guess this, a lack of Turing complete smart contracts, a lack of a Turing complete smart contracting language, I should say. So something like the Ethereum virtual machine. I think that's something that Monero would require. However, the problem with that, right, if you implemented something like that, it doesn't scale very well. Right, that's a lot of the problems that Ethereum's having, and in order to scale Turing complete smart contracts, you'd also need, I think, another method of scaling. I tend to favor things like execution sharding, so you're able to shard a blockchain into multiple shards by the same randomized validator set. That's personally what I'm in favor of. So, of course, if you don't have Turing complete smart contracts, then Monero can scale to the moon and you don't have that problem. So I can understand not wanting to do that, because by introducing sharding, you're going to introduce a whole bunch of other problems, and it's a massive engineering challenge. But that's still where I stand on that one. And that goes back to thinking that, base layers need DeFi, basically. Another critique, unless you want to comment on that.
I guess I obviously don't speak for the entire Monero community, and maybe once we go into Q&A, people could throw things out there. But I think the general response would be, we would see that something more as a second layer on Monero, that in the layers to be built on Monero, whereas focus layer one, decentralized, censorship resistant, making sure we get digital cash correct, and then we could add all the fancy schmancy smart contracts on the layer two. So
that's a really interesting discussion. I think this is one of the biggest debates in crypto right now, is what I would refer to as modular scaling, which is scaling through layer twos, or monolithic scaling, which is scaling through the layer one. And I've always been an advocate of monolithic scaling myself. I think that when you have things like layer twos, for the most part, and I think you can't really get around to it, it's fundamental, is that you have trade-offs in user experience or security trade-offs, or a whole league of different issues of composabilities, issues of interoperability. Just requiring the user to make extra steps, I think, is very counterproductive towards wider adoption. So it's for that reason that I really prefer a sharded approach instead, in which you're able to scale horizontally and increase and decrease the number of shards based on activity. But that is really on the cutting edge, and Monero would be pretty smart not to pursue that now and maybe just adopt someone else's code in a few years from now.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like Monero isn't pro you call it monolithic scaling. Yeah, I mean, I think more so than most cryptos, right? So like with its dynamic block size, tail emission, Monero isn't even really I mean, there's very theoretical talk about layer twos, but really it's focused on trying to onboard as many users as possible to layer one and, be the Visa of the world on layer one. I mean, but maybe with lacking a Turing complete smart contracts, right? And that would be something later, but definitely looking to scale very much more so than a Bitcoin, right? So dynamic block sizes, I don't even think we mentioned that. Are you familiar with Monero's dynamic block sizes?
I am. I actually really like it. I'm still curious if it works a similar way. As far as I understood, basically you need a certain amount of fees in a block in order to then propose an increase in the block size. Does it still work that way that it did when I last looked into it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super technical on it, but the idea being that as more transactions are required of the network, the blocks can dynamically scale up or scale down based on demand, and then it actually ties into the tail emission where there's this punishment or a fee assessed so that people don't just spam the block size.
That's right. That's I remember now. The miners need to pay, right, to increase the block size, and you need a certain amount of fee in order to justify that. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that could come out of the continuous tail emission that's always there. So they can be kind of a fee assessed with that regard. But the general idea being that as more people are looking to use the network and more transactions are taking place, the blocks get larger, transaction fees actually go down because you're fitting, more transactions in per block.
And the thing is, based on this design, the only critique I had, and this was a few years ago, so this might have changed. I just thought that the way the numbers were tweaked, I would have tweaked the numbers down a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's already happened in terms of the cost to increase the block, because I think that still created, it kind of skewed the transactions to be a little bit more expensive, but I could be completely wrong about
those things have been tweaked over time, but I don't want to put out false information.
Sure. But that's also a really easy thing to change, But as far as I'm concerned, and this is the cool thing, is that Monero can basically scale to global scale and serve the whole world as money, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the scalability of the system as it is now. I mean, I think
the major criticism would be the size of running a node, right? That can hardware expand fast enough and can bandwidth expand fast enough to keep up with the dynamic block size.
I haven't really looked at the numbers because obviously the ring signatures and a few other elements are more expensive, computationally expensive for Monero.
Yes.
So I haven't looked at the numbers, but if you take something like the Bitcoin code base, right? I'm of the thorough belief that you could just scale that to Visa scale levels today, and you could basically still run that off a 10-year-old laptop, and I think that's fine. Oh, sorry, no. PayPal levels would be 10-year-old laptop. You need a 5-year-old laptop if I'm trying to be accurate. But still, and not a super fancy one or anything, middle range laptop, and you can run that node on that. I think that's fine. I think requiring every node to be able to run on a Raspberry Pi, which is this tiny little computer that you can buy for $40, I think is a bit excessive to want to bottleneck the network to that device. That's my very opinionated opinion on on scaling.
But Monero transaction, and I don't want to put the wrong, but I think it's about 4 times heavier than kind of a Bitcoin transaction.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine then. That's okay.
You're getting a lot with that, right? So those that want to use Bitcoin in a way that resembles Monero, they're doing things like coin joins and all these extra transactions to achieve the same end result, whereas that's kind of built into Monero. So kind of an apples to apples comparison where you're trying to use Bitcoin in a fungible way. It approaches being the same weight in terms of transactions. And then those that would say Monero can scale would say, well, Nielsen's law and Moore's law will be on pace with, the adoption. And then in addition to that, Monero's tech, just the transaction size have historically become more efficient over time, right? So there's been a lot of evolution there. Things like bulletproofs plus plus. So these, advances in encryption that have allowed you're getting the same end result with less computational power.
No, in that case, I would say Monero can scale to global scale as far as I'm concerned and serve the whole world as money today. If it can't today, in 5 years it will, because hardware and optimization, increases. So yeah, that's what made the whole situation of BTC so tragic to me as well. Like, it's absolutely capable of scaling, and it doesn't, just shoots itself in the foot. And to me, that's what reveals the bigger problem. Like, if such a decision could have been made, that's the wrong decision. So therefore, to me, the governance is lacking. And why is the governance lacking? Because the system got captured.
Yes.
Right. And I don't blame the people that captured the system. The system should have been more resilient to begin with, right? And that's where we learn our lessons. And it's over time that it's all still a running experiment, right? So we have to watch some of these experiments fail and then learn from that experience.
Yes. So what additional criticism? So optional privacy, smart contract, Turing complete smart contracts. What's the next one? Are there other major?
Oh yes, there's more. so actually, I feel like I'm being such a grumpy person.
No, man, no.
It's all bad. And
bring it. We love it. We love to hear it.
So I have really, and honestly, this is not a deal breaker to me, but I do think proof of stake is actually a better type of consensus mechanism for a blockchain. I just think you get more bang for your buck, so to speak, and that can translate into better security and or a better economics, because you don't have to pay for all of that mining equipment, right? So therefore, if I think proof of stake is more secure, it's more decentralized even. Well, actually, maybe with an ASIC, because it's an algorithm. Maybe in your case, maybe it's might be more interesting, not as straightforward of a comparison at least, and then there's all sorts of other factors to consider. So that's actually an interesting thing to throw in there. But I think that proof of stake is just achieves the goals of a blockchain better. So that's probably a controversial take in the Monero community.
We're gonna have that debate down at Monero. You should come to Monerotopia, by the way. This is where I'll throw that in. You should come down to in Mexico City in May. Honestly, if you want to, let me know if you're interested. We could put you on the panel. We're gonna have a proof of work versus proof of stake panel.
Oh wow!
We have one of the oldest crypto note devs, the guy who's claimed to have implemented the first
which is a fascinating story, by the way. Let's not get into that now.
The Xano guy. Yeah, we don't have to go down that road. But the guy who's now running Xano, Andre, he's Xano is moving to, or it's developed a POS system that is built on crypto note. It's interesting. So we're going to have that debate, but I guess, the ASIC resistance, what excites me about proof of work and Monero sticking to it. I guess one is like the 51% attack, right? State actors, or those with a lot of endless resources. They have endless access to money, to fiat, but it may not be as easy for them to round up all of the ammunition that's out there, right? That the guns that are hidden under people's beds, which are people's CPUs, right? So if there was kind of this war, it is very decentralized in that anybody with a CPU anywhere can participate in the network, right? They have access to the internet, they have access to electricity, and they can go up against a powerful entity that would have to, basically come up with more CPU power than what's out there, as opposed to fighting it with dollars, which is really what proof of stake at the end of the day.
I see it a little bit differently, because if you look at it from the perspective of a sophisticated actor, let's say I'm a sophisticated actor, right, and I want to attack a blockchain. From my perspective, if I have to spend 50 million purchasing stake versus spending 50 million on mining equipment and, you know, everything to house it, the electricity, etc., it's the same. So I would put the idea of mining power just still in this dollar bracket. Like, this is the cost to attack this system. And you can calculate what the cost of attack is, right, based on the mining power or stake that's available. And, you know, generally speaking, if you're comparing two networks of a similar size, if you look at the cost to attack a system, proof of stake has a far higher cost to attack. And that's why I think that proof of stake is more secure, because you're using the actual, you know, the capital of the value of the cryptocurrency to actually to protect itself, right? And that's not that different to actually also, because I mean, the way mining works, and unless we're talking about altruistic mining here, but I think the vast majority of mining has a profit motive, and I think that's how it should work. So the amount of mining is directly proportional to the inflation or the fees that miners are collecting. And then if you look at that, that is your security budget, basically. And then you can map the amount of mining power there is to that, and that should add up, so to speak, that's within miners' profit margins. And if you were to attack it, I mean, a state actor, if you will, could absolutely just start buying tons of GPUs and could probably even have better access to such things and create, you know, server farms that could then go ahead and attack a blockchain, right?
Yeah,
so
it's conceivable, but I mean, I think that's kind of the greatest argument against proof of stake is. But
it is against proof of work as well, right? It's the same argument. From my perspective, at least, I don't see how it being like proof of work makes that any different. How that being physical hardware versus stake being any different. To me, I just see a dollar cost to attack.
Because they would have to obtain the hardware is already decentralized. It's already out there. Everybody already has 5 CPUs in their home. It's already been
right, but it's not like state actors can't gain access or buy these things, right?
Right, they have to get but still they have to go acquire it, and they have to acquire enough to overcome,
right.
You know, the.
But in the case of stake, they also have to acquire it, right?
Yeah, but they have endless money printing power.
Right, but if you have endless money printing power, then you have endless buying power to buy GPUs.
Right. You do, but still, there's a little bit more of a barrier there. You have to obtain. You still have to obtain the CPUs versus just clicking the buy button and.
Well, I think the more valuable barrier here is the cost. So for me, if you compare a 50 million, let's say we have a proof of stake system and a proof of work system. Let's say I'll use, actually I've done the comparison before, so I'll use historical numbers. When BTC was at 100 million, right? Or sorry, 100 billion, I think it was. Yeah. So when say you have a proof of work system at 100 billion and you have a proof of stake system at 100 billion, right? To attack the proof of work system, right? The attack will be maybe 2 billion, right? Based on historical numbers, based on the inflation and fees that Bitcoin had at that time, if I'm just using that as an example, okay? Then it costs 2 billion to attack that network, right? To overcome it. In the case of a proof of stake network, right, you need to have more than 50 billion, more than 51 billion if you want. It'll be more than that because you'll drive up the price. So 2 billion versus 51 billion plus, that's a big difference in terms of the cost to attack. That's the aspect that really convinces me for.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and Zano, Andre from Zano, I think would tend to agree with you on that. I think it's an interesting argument. So do you see proof of work as then being a dinosaur that will not be here in, whatever, 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
I think Monero makes a good case for still being proof of work in 20 years from now and serving that niche and serving humanity in a great way. I could see that happening. Or maybe there'll be a Monero fork that goes proof of stake. That'd be amazing. Yeah,
it's possible. And to the access argument too, right? So people in Venezuela can, plug in their Android phone and with access to electricity can start.
Android phone's not going to be able to mint you a lot of Monero.
Well, the idea is you can something, right? It
would cost you more though to store your phone battery and seep all your energy, your data. Actually, it wouldn't be much data. But no, I in terms of like democratizing access, I think proof of stake has more potential for that as well.
As opposed to having to get on an exchange, right? There's a way without KYC or AML to obtain Monero anywhere in the world.
Right, exactly.
Very important. You can do that. It's super efficient to do it with an Android phone. No, well, that's what. But it is ASIC resistant. RandomX basically makes any CPU as good as any other CPU.
But hold on. But if you were to do it with your phone, right? If you want to say, okay, I'm going to mine Monero with my phone or to gain access, you would get like fractions of a cent per week or something. I don't know what the exact numbers is. Yeah. And it would be costing you so much more money in electricity and degrading your phone's hardware. So actually, for say a person in a developing country to do this would really have to be a charitable thing. It's not helping them, it's costing them, right? And they're not even gaining it.
Depends how badly they for what reasons they need.
That's a very extreme scenario, right. But you know what? I'll concede. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. Proof of work has that advantage, but that's
anybody anywhere in the world can anonymously obtain Monero with access to electricity.
Okay, I will give you that. That's fair. Yeah. That's a unique advantage that proof of work has. I can't disagree with you on that one. Yeah. But in terms of access to say that new inflation, I think from the perspective like that, what I just drew, that person with his phone. Right, and etc. And he's doing it at a loss, right? Compared to say a guy that can buy any amount of Monero, even if it's like $1 worth of Monero, and he can put that in a staking pool, and then he's getting the same amount of interest that anyone else has, right? I think that is actually democratizes access to validation and democratizes access to that inflation more so than proof of work can, because proof of work has these inherent economies of scale and competitive aspects.
Understood. No, I agree. I think we could bring this up in the chat. There might be some good takes on that. What would you say is your next Monero criticism?
Oh, do I have more? Okay, so I've done turn completeness. I've done proof of work. Governance would be another one, right? And actually, I think we already covered that before. Yeah. I think single implementation like that, that's how all cryptocurrencies start. That's fine. But I think over time, you really need to. I don't think that system scales to like massive numbers. And once you get to massive numbers, you're going to get the worst type of people. Will be able to outmaneuver and outmanipulate and outcorrupt the good people in many cases. And, I think this is something that I think you learn from like history, that there's a famous quote by Lord Acton. He said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I just think there's too much inherent power in that position to have the power to change the rules. And you can manipulate narratives too easily. This is why I think you need more concrete types of voting systems. Yeah.
Okay, I like that. Let's jump back to Bitcoin for a second, or just in general, right? So you run an investment fund. What cryptos are in your fund, and how are you assessed? So is Bitcoin completely out of the fund? Like you see it as a dying dinosaur? And
no Bitcoin in the Cyber Capital investment fund since 2017.
Okay.
So, and this is a fund that really aims to invest in the best possible cryptocurrency, portfolio of the best possible cryptocurrencies at all times. And back in 2017, this was even more controversial than it is today, obviously. But it's still a rather controversial thing to do. And people might accuse me of being of lacking a certain sense of conservatism, but I see it the other way around. I think that if you're investing in Bitcoin and you don't understand or you don't know for certain where the security budget's going to come from in 10 years, I think that's a very risky thing to do. So yeah, and that's why we haven't
claim to be most concerned about security, right? That aspect of Bitcoin, like, whoa, we're ossified and we're extremely secure, yet they're not really willing to start negotiating the future and what needs to be done to the protocol to.
It's very hypocritical. Yeah. There are some Bitcoiners that I absolutely do respect and they bite the bullet on these issues, but they're far and few in between.
So what cryptos are in your fund, and why are you those?
Yeah, no, we're not overly public about what is and isn't in the fund, but I think generally we
What are you looking for? Yeah.
So actually what I just described to you actually is what we're looking for. So we want monolithic scaling. We want Turing complete smart contracts. We want proof of stake with a stakeholder based voting. I've been thinking a lot about governance recently a lot. I actually think that having the longer you lock your stake in for, the more weight you have in governance. I think that's really, really important. That's to ensure good long-term decision making. I think those are some of the main ones. Yeah, on-chain governance, proof of stake, and execution sharding. Because if you have Turing complete smart contracts, you need something pretty. You need something to be able to scale that system in a good way. So I think those are the requirements. And then certain cryptocurrencies get close to all of those requirements. None actually do. I have this list of like, this is what I want a cryptocurrency to be, and not a single cryptocurrency actually hits all of those marks. So that's the interesting part. So we try to invest in cryptocurrencies that come close to that. So things like Algorand and Near and Tezos and Ton has been quite interesting and quite novel. That's something we've been looking into more recently.
Nobody's using these cryptos on the dark markets though, man.
You're right. You're right.
There's no more adoption. When people need digital cash, they're not I
know. I see it either way. Either way, these cryptocurrencies are going to adopt some privacy solution, or Monero is going to adopt the DeFi stuff. I don't know. That's how I see it. Okay. So I think that's the challenge. And we also invest in things like different DeFi projects. So things like what should I say here? Synthetics and Aave and some of the big blue chips. Big DeFi blue chips were actually all early investors in, since I've been an investor in Ethereum since day one. I've grown a bit more skeptical around Ethereum more recently. There's it made a few pivots that I wasn't particularly happy with. There's two things, and I've already discussed this, so I think the smart people in your audience could already deduct what I'm about to say. But I think in Ethereum, I think there's also a lack of on-chain governance.
The DAO fiasco. I mean, that happened early on.
Well, that's I think more of a separate issue. It does relate to on-chain governance. Actually, that's fair. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, that's an example of that, I suppose. So I think you have a lack of on-chain governance, and further than that, there's really a rejection of on-chain governance, which to me also means that the governance of Ethereum is going to be vulnerable to kind of capture at a larger scale. And conflicts of interest and corruption, etc. And my other criticism of Ethereum is also that it's gone the more modular route of scaling, because it's not planning to actually go ahead with doing execution sharding. So it's not actually scaling its layer one, and it's favoring layer two development instead. So that to me was just really upsetting. That's actually the most upsetting thing that's happened for me in cryptocurrency over the last 2 years. Not FTX, not Luna, not any of that stuff. No, it's the quiet pivot of Ethereum away from execution sharding. That's what keeps me up at night.
I don't know what keeps me up. I don't know. Regulation. What's your take on regulation? Let's just cover that topic, and then we'll jump into the Spaces room. If anybody that's listening to Spaces will be in there soon. You guys could ask your questions to Justin. Let's talk about that KYC, AML. I'm in it. I mean, look at my poster here, right? I'm a liberty fanatic, right? I'm trying. The crypto anarchist is in me, is what keeps me motivated. What is your take on regulation in crypto and where we're headed, and what you personally think about it, and what you want the world to look like in terms of how governments interact with crypto?
Right. So the crypto anarchist in me always feels a bit conflicted on this subject. So I always feel I have to wear a different hat. But wearing the hat that we live in a world that is dominated by governments, right? I think living in that world, we do need some sort of regulations, right? And, I find that a lot as an investor. Some people don't want to invest or get involved in cryptocurrency because of a lack of regulation, actually. So I think there really needs to be a balance between, not having regulations that are harmful to cryptocurrency, but at the same time also having regulations that actually help cryptocurrency. So for instance, I have nothing against like centralized exchanges that are, say, jurisdictioned in certain countries to fall under the same regulations that other centralized companies or financial institutions would. Right? I don't have anything against that. I think that actually helps to protect investors and helps protect users. I mean, we saw so many of these blow-ups last year from FTX and from Celsius and all these other big things, and so many people lost so much money, and that's actually done a lot of harm, not just to individuals but also to cryptocurrency as a whole. So I think,
but how much money did you lose in FTX?
None.
Right, because you understood crypto, right? You made it in a decentralized way.
Yes, the fund I manage does not keep their coins on an exchange.
Right. So isn't that the solution? We just use crypto the way it was intended to be used.
I mean, that's what I would like, but I think the reality has to be a bit more nuanced than that. Because I think that self-custody is not easy for people, and not everyone is ready to take on that responsibility. And that therefore you have like a mixture of solutions, right? Like most investors are not that sophisticated to necessarily manage their own private keys, and then you have to balance the risk of them losing their own private keys versus the risk of them losing it on some exchange or some bank, right? So I think the question is not that straightforward, unfortunately.
How about there's discussion of banning Monero, right? We've seen it happen. We just recently happened in Dubai.
Yes, I would like to bring that up.
Senator
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, Senator Warren wants to put out is trying to usher through a bill to essentially mandate KYC AML even on unhosted wallets, right?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. So the thing about that, so the thing that really upsets me.
My core question here: are you concerned? Okay, so we have to be practical with regulate. People are losing money, they're getting hurt. But are you concerned that this can lead to some kind of co-opting, which, right, you're concerned with the governance models of crypto, and I get that. But this idea that governments can start to seep into and potentially co-opt cryptocurrency by way of regulation, and cryptos evolving towards and making design decisions that are in accordance with these regulations. Like we had the discussion of optional privacy, and really your opinion was because of regulations, it's a nice thing to have because you can basically work with the regulators.
Well, and also
does that lead to potential co-opting of the cryptocurrencies? I
mean, the client manager of the fund I manage is like a private organization, which is like a third party that looks at our transactions to make sure that we can't scam anyone, right? So I think that you can also look at that within a private context. It doesn't necessarily have to be a government, and that just adds to transparency, right? But no, this whole situation with governments trying to ban Monero, I think is just so unbelievably misguided. And that's also because I understand that every cryptocurrency is capable of a high degree of privacy, I think, or Monero is especially capable, obviously, and it makes it easier for people. But you can, set up mixers on other blockchains, and you can do things like zero knowledge proofs. So very expensive computationally if it's not natively implemented, obviously. But all of these things are possible. So I think that all blockchains are inherently have optional privacy. So going after like something like Monero to me just makes no sense at all. If you're trying to, like, from a regulator's perspective, you're trying to like bring consistent and helpful policies. It just seems very misguided to me, and really comes from a place of not understanding, the nature of cryptocurrency. So yeah, I'm really against this idea of, and have spoken to regulators even that I seem like they kind of perceive Monero as like the bad guy, like, oh no, they're like the black sheep, like, oh, what, you have Monero, like, I want to remind them that, privacy doesn't mean you're up to something bad, it just means you appreciate, that human right, right? So I think that comes from a really, really misguided place. And I hope that as, these governments mature and their understanding matures, that they're not going to push such unbelievably misguided policies. So yeah, I think it's really negative. I mean, this is the thing, right? So unless the government in like a conspiracy theory way, like buys off the developers who are then corrupted to change the protocol, that would be the thing that I'm concerned with, right? But here I think you're more referring to something like the government is going to, because of their policy, it's going to influence development to maybe be more friendly towards regulation.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that Monero is not going, I have no doubt that Monero is not going to do that. Is not going to do that. Sorry. I have no doubt that no way they're going to yield. And that's part of the culture and the part of the community there. And I think that's great. And I think that all a government can really do is really push it more underground and make it more niche, which makes it even harder to control. So it even goes, or even to monitor, which really goes against their interests. So they shouldn't do that. And I think really, cryptocurrency is designed to survive that, and they could ban it and people are still going to use it on the black market, right? They've done nothing to actually solve what they perceive as a problem. So yeah, that's what I think about that.
Okay.
But in terms of the role regulation serves, I still think that in a world where we still live under governments, I think it can actually serve a really positive role. So an interesting effect, for instance, is that recently there's been some talk of, say, not allowing exchanges to stake. I don't agree with their reasoning, but it is interesting that centralized exchanges staking has been a bit of an issue in terms of the distribution of a proof of stake cryptocurrency. That creates a form of centralization, that a government steps in and say, oh no, you're not allowed to do that. Ironically, actually decentralizes the distribution of the validators more. So it's interesting how sometimes regulation can actually have such a positive effect as well.
Justin, thank you so much, man. I think this concludes our interview portion of the talk here, and then we'll jump into the room. Anything you want to put out there in terms of resources you want people to be aware of, places people can find you, learn more about you?
Sure. So you can check me out on Twitter, Justin_Bons. I release a lot of my my writing, my articles, my critiques on Twitter, and you can also check out my company, Cyber Capital. So those are the main places to reach me. And I just want to repeat what I said earlier. I think Monero is really cool. I think what you guys are doing is really serving humanity in a really positive way. And I don't want to disrespect that with my critical eye or anything. That's really not my intent. And I know there's quite a few people from the Monero community listening, so I just want to say to them, just keep up the great work, and keep remembering, the goals of cryptocurrency, which is not decentralization per se, because decentralization is just the means to the end. The end is economic freedom, is financial sovereignty, is privacy, is censorship resistance. And if you keep that ahead above all else, including your symbols and your community, and put principles before symbols, put principles before peer pressure, you put that first, and I think Monero will continue serving humanity for a long time.
Fantastic, man. Greatly appreciate you. Thanks for doing this. And let's jump into the chat. All right. Anybody else that wants to speak? Now's the time to request. Trent, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, man? I had a quick question about cryptocurrency. I wanted your opinion on this.
Sure. What do you got?
Okay, so when it comes to cryptocurrency, well, I'm thinking about Bitcoin. That's mainly what I know about. Not too well versed, but from what I know, there's a finite amount, right? Compared to fiat currency, where they hit a button and they can just print basically infinite amounts of debt. The idea of financial sovereignty is that there's actually a finite amount. So they can't just print more Bitcoin, and as the halving continues, it gets harder to accumulate, right? Mm-hmm. So at some point, if this does become the overarching powerful currency, at some point, do you see this becoming a thing where the wealth becomes bottlenecked, and basically a ceiling happens where people that are below the ceiling cannot get above the ceiling because of the finite amount of wealth?
Meaning that people won't be able to obtain crypto. Those that already have it will have a too far of an advantage for anybody else to catch up. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yes, pretty much. And then in situations where crypto is like the main currency being used, if there is a situation where people cannot catch up, do you think that'll lead into a lot of crypto lending, or do you think it'll just become a situation where there's a gang of poor people and then there's a bunch of people at the top who were basically getting head starts?
Well, I mean, right now, the way things work, right, you have a monopoly in terms of who can create money, and that's government. And they do it by mandate, by fiat. And so crypto opens it up and it lets money fairly compete. And the market then decides what is the best form of money. Monero, or Bitcoin's limited supply, I would argue that the cap itself really isn't the what makes Bitcoin attractive. It's that the supply is perfectly predictable by the market, and that nobody can alter the supply. The fact that it is capped is just an easy way of expressing that concept that people can understand. Oh, there's only 21 million, but really the value there is that it's not so much the capped, but that the rate of emission is known and predictable, and that there's no backroom small group of people that's deciding, let's create more of it, because they can't. In terms of people being able to, because of that, have a windfall because they were early adopters, there's definitely, attributes of that. And we've seen that, right, with these people that have become mega billionaires. Satoshi would essentially have, on his way to being a trillionaire, right? But the idea is that because none can be created out of thin air, out of need, people will be spreading their Bitcoin around because services are still demanded, right? People live in an economy. And they're going to need to spend their crypto. So unless people are just plan on hoarding it for the rest of their lives, the natural tendency will be for it to become more distributed over time as people demand it. So anybody that's providing a service or adding value to the world will be obtaining whatever the crypto of choice is, whether it's Bitcoin or Monero, they'll be getting paid in that. And those that have it will be willing to give it up, because at the end of the day, if all they have is, digits on a computer, there's no real value there, right? People at the end of the day, they're living in the world, and they're going to be spending their crypto. If that answers your question.
That does. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, man. Let me get Justin up here. I'm going to try to. Justin is now okay. Cool. Justin, I think, is up here. I would say too, man. To look at this is where Monero and Bitcoin differentiate. We talked about a little bit in the talk, and it's that Monero has a tail emission, so it isn't capped. It's not capped at 21 million. It's nominally capped at about 18.6 million, and thereafter there's a steady emission of Monero throughout. In perpetuity throughout time, so there'll always be new Monero created. And one of the reasons why that's potentially a good thing, number one, is it will help maintain the security of the network in perpetuity. So the miners will always have an incentive to mine and secure the network. But additionally, for the reasons that you're saying, there'll always be new Monero that's being created that people can permissionlessly access through the network via mining and obtain it, because there'll always be new Monero. Justin, we got you coming in?
Hello. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we got you.
Fantastic. Okay, good. I just had to switch over to another headset here.
So
great. Well, it was really fun discussion. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
it was great.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I'm adding some people here that are asking questions. Trent just had one. I asked that when you're out. He was basically saying, is there a concern that due to Monero, Bitcoin's cap, let's just talk about it in terms of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of Bitcoin's cap, is there a concern that there'll be a windfall to the early adopters, and that those that are latecomers, late adopters, laggards, that they'll never be able to catch up, and there'll be more inequity in terms of wealth than there ever was, because there'll be those that hold a vast amount of value in Bitcoin versus the noobs?
Yeah, yeah. I'm not too concerned with that problem because I think that over time, the distribution just becomes more decentralized.
Yeah.
I mean, if like early adopters make a lot of money, then they're going to want to sell some of that, right? And, buy a house or, whatever they might want to do. And then that over enough time, wealth just becomes more and more distributed, especially if something like Monero that is still growing in terms of adoption. So yeah, and proof of work, and I will say another advantage of proof of work, it is a very good initial distribution method. Yeah, it is.
Good answer. Good answer. I basically voiced the same opinion there. And Andy, what's going on? What do you got?
Hey, brothers. A few quick questions, if you could. Enjoyed the speech. Thank you. Why are you not seemingly concerned about centralizing aspects of POS, threats of attack, or just as a too small locus of control? Also, do you have any thoughts on Chia? And also, do you think Bitcoin could change to maintain its sort of, core things while being energy sustainable? I read an article that said historically, to move up the market cap by 1/4%, it's equated to about 10% increase in energy, which obviously doesn't sustain. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, so there's a few questions there. So in terms of the centralizing effect of stake and proof of stake, I think I just described, because that argument also applies to proof of stake, right? So that over time the distribution becomes greater and greater, and I think honestly, like in terms of like true decentralization, I actually think that all cryptocurrencies currently are still haven't achieved true decentralization, because you need that massive scale to make it so big that no single party could ever attack it, right? I think that was always the goal for cryptocurrency, and I think the same is true if we try to envision, the ideal proof of work network and the ideal proof of stake network. I think the same is true there as well. I will say proof of work has the advantage as well, since I want to be completely fair here, of you do see the phenomenon that it cycles. So you usually have like a different group of miners every 5 years, right? That's less so the case with proof of stake. But I mean, the way that I see something like staking is that it's really, I think it can be comparable to like something like bonds, where it's like low return, low reward. And I don't believe that's actually where the majority of wealth accumulation even happens, right? You have guys that, found startups that things like, Elon Musk with his SpaceX and PayPal and, all of these sort of things. I think that's where far more wealth accumulation actually occurs. So I think that's what skews, let's say, the concentration of wealth, and it doesn't actually come from stake, like where stakers are not getting super rich just off staking, right? So, yeah. And you had two other questions. If you could just help me out with one of the other ones.
Yes, thank you. Could Bitcoin turn scalable? And the other question is your thoughts on Chia.
Right. Could Bitcoin become scalable? I mean, technically, yes. Politically, no. I think, and also probably like, I think politically no and culturally no would be the answer, or at least not in time, right? I mean, who knows what happens in 100 years from now, right? It's a completely different set of people, but not in time in terms of the 7 to 11 year horizon that's needed, because then it needs to increase its capacity and then needs to completely switch narratives to kind of promote the use of money, like buy coffees with your Bitcoin, it just, that whole narrative was really just wiped out and pushed out, during that period of the block size debates. So it's not just that it needs to increase the block size limit, right, in order to scale. It also then needs to attract the adoption. The adoption, it's, pushed away for all these years, I still vividly remember when Steam accepted Bitcoin and then they stopped, citing, unreliability and high fees. That's the type of thing we'd have to work back. So I just don't see it doing all of that within the 7 to 11 year timeline. So,
well, suppose it could be a reserve currency and not a transactional thing. And also your thoughts on Chia, please.
Right. Well, I mean, the problem with that is again, this is security model, right? Like it needs to generate a high number of fees, and I just don't see the fees, sustaining above $60 per transaction, which is round about what it would need to be secure. And then it's not consistent, right? Even if it drops down for a little bit. Chia, I feel like I should not say anything about Chia without having done thorough research. So, yeah. Sorry, can you remind me? Chia, it uses hard drive space, right? Am I correct there? Or, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I would view it being very similar to proof of work in that regard. Yeah,
it's considered a Nakamoto protocol. Seems pretty similar with a different engine. So do you have any thoughts on that as a sustainable alternative for sort of some of the ideals of POW and BTC?
Right. I believe it is less wasteful than proof of work, but it's still more wasteful than proof of stake. So I guess it's somewhere in the middle for me. Yeah.
Good stuff. Aeon, what's going on, man? What do you got?
Hey, how's it going? Good talk as usual.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, you got any comments? Any questions for Justin?
Yeah, I noticed during the talk he was talking about Ethereum and how he didn't, he was talking about like Justin was talking about his kind of, favorite coin or the coin he would want. He didn't like Ethereum because they started moving to layer 2, but he'd also want like ubiquitous scaling. And so I'm curious, what methodology are you kind of envisioning of scaling? Is it just like block size increase, or?
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. So I'm really an advocate of execution sharding right now. So we basically split a chain up into multiple pieces, which are then, but they're all validated from the same validator set and randomized. I'm of the belief that that's a system that can scale and have Turing complete smart contracts while preserving decentralization. Yet to be fully proven. I think we have some really pretty decent implementations out in the wild now. But it's certainly in the realm of being, more experimental blockchain technology, if you will. Yeah, so that's really what I'm advocating for now.
Moving towards sharding, and they kind of abandoned it, but I don't know why.
Yep.
So.
That's right. Well, because they and I've had really extensive discussions with Ethereum core devs about this as well, and they just don't believe it's possible. They just don't believe it's possible to kind of achieve that, so to speak, and to like engineer their way around these problems. And I disagree. And I think that certain blockchains like Elrond, like Near, like Ton are proving them wrong. And they still maintain that it's impossible, which I think is really silly myself. But yeah, that's the situation we're in. It was originally part of Ethereum's roadmap, and it very quietly pivoted, and there wasn't that much discussion on the subject, actually, which goes back to my critique around the governance of Ethereum as well.
And then a follow-up, I'm curious, are you familiar with Eric Voskuil's work in crypto economics?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I am. I can't say.
You might be interested in that because it brings up a lot of the just threat models in regards to proof of work and proof of stake. And his conclusion is that proof of stake, once in the scenario where there's a 51% staker, there's no way to unseat that censor if they're trying to censor the chain, trying to censor certain transactions. And in proof of work, there is an ability to unseat that censor by adding more energy because the consensus exists outside of the chain, where proof of stake exists internally to the chain. And once someone has majority stake, there's no way to unseat that person.
I actually think it's actually more the other way around in the way I see it. That's because, say, if you attack Bitcoin, I know Monero is a little bit different, but I'm used to using Bitcoin in the example. I'll try to see where Monero is different. But if you were to attack Bitcoin, right, and say you have a very large majority of hashing power, like let's say 80%, for example, stake. I don't think anyone would ever attack a blockchain with an actual 51%. That's not a very reliable way to attack a blockchain. But let's say an attacker has 80%. Then you attack Bitcoin, and then the only thing Bitcoin can do at that point is like you say, wait it out. But I mean, that would take potentially could take months to have such a build up and a massive expense, and driving mining profitability lower and lower in the process as well. So I don't think that that's very feasible. But the reason why I see it,
wait it out,
right,
just that more energy could be added to the network to overcome the attacker. Whereas in proof of stake, you can't add. There's nothing external to the chain to overcome that.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
And that's the difference between proof of stake operates on an internal mechanism into the chain, whereas proof of work operates as an external mechanism.
But then you are relying on a very large mass of altruistic miners, right? Because then there would be
but energy is ubiquitous, so it's always available. Whereas stake is inherent to the chain, so it's not. You see where I'm getting at? It's not obtainable in kind of a.
Well, I mean, people could stake more coins. They could bring more coins online. They could buy more off the market, right? All of these things. But I can see.
Stake, they don't let anyone else stake. Essentially, they just reject anyone trying to stake new coins.
But I think if we're talking at a massive scale here, and someone attacks a proof of work network and they have 80% of the hashing power, and you can't just do an algorithm, like a mining algorithm switch like Bitcoin would do, after which you just repeat the attack, right? So in the case of Monero, just be a single attack. Then say they have 90% of the hash or something, or I'll stick with 80% of the hash. It's still then you're relying upon this altruism factor of people really bringing massive amounts of mining power online, costing massive amounts of money, right? We're talking like hundreds of millions here at scale, at least, to then counter that attack. I just don't think, that's possible. It'd be beautiful to witness. I think that did happen with Bitcoin Cash, actually, now that I think about it, because some people tried to attack the chain and then a bunch of mining power just moved over, kind of protecting it. Right, and then for a while it was unprofitable. So actually, there is precedent for that. I just wouldn't consider it to be something to put something to put up on stone as like this is a certainty. There's like a lot of variability there in terms of what could happen, and I don't like having to rely on altruism in these situations. But this is the proof of work case, right? If I discuss proof of stake actually has a solid solution to this, right? In the case where the majority of stake is malicious and attacking the chain, right? You can slash that stake. That's something that's not possible with proof of work systems. So in proof of stake, you can actually destroy the stake, right? Meaning that the actual, and if you want to try to repeat that attack, you can just repeat that counter infinitely, basically. Making it so that you can't really attack the system in that context. Like there's edge cases, right? But I can't, the cost to attack becomes infinite at that point because it becomes circular, right?
But the ability to slash requires some sort of execution on the chain, and if there's majority staker, they're just not going to execute that slash against themselves.
No, this would be a minority fork in that case, basically slashing the balances of the attackers. This is very dramatic. This is like nuclear option, right?
Yeah.
This is similar to Bitcoin switching its algorithm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back to the proof of work thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is no Voskal doesn't say it's a certainty in any sense, but the economic rationalization is that fees will cause incentive for alternative hash rate to come online and overtake the malicious actor. So it wouldn't be based on altruism. The theory is that it would be based on fee pressure, which goes back to the argument of
Because
security
because
model.
of the built up transaction like in the in the mempool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because a lot of people
there's
want to
no
move it.
certainty. There's no certainty to it. Even he says it might work, might not.
No, and I like if we saw something like this happen at scale, like we're all in new territory here, right? Be watching very closely, trying to learn.
Yeah, I think we'd like to read because it has a lot of good information just in general about threat models and security.
Sure. What did you say his name was again?
Eric Voskuil, and the book is
Eric
Crypto
Voskuil.
Economics.
All right, cool. I'll check it out. Sounds pretty interesting. Yeah. Yeah, but I do think like that's where proof of stake I think does have an advantage in terms of being able to slash stake, and obviously that's extreme, but it does solve for that, extreme scenario, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, we interviewed Eric a few weeks ago. Aeon, be curious to hear your take on Justin's criticism of Bitcoin's and Monero's governance model.
I don't know, governance is tricky overall. I know Decred had like a pretty substantial governance model with the proof of work, proof of stake hybrid. And I mean, there was a point where they thought miners were, just dumping the price. And so they all voted to just give miners less of the subsidy. And so it just comes back to the problem I see in voting in traditional, democratic societies where it's just minority is subservient to the majority.
Justin, you have a response to that?
Sure. I was the end of it just broke off a bit. No, but I will say stake is very different to how, say, democracies function. Democracies function with like one person, one vote. Proof of stake based cryptocurrencies function with one person, one vote. So I think in that regard, actually, it's closer to how companies function or how decisions are made in companies, because it's the equity that comes with voting shares, which allows that's how the governance process works. And I think that's also how cryptocurrencies, at least proof of stake based cryptocurrencies, should work as well.
I would say it's even worse because you have a consolidation of stake by the parties that have the most stake. So
right, and I will agree with you halfway, and that's it, that I think that, and here's the irony of it all, right? Like I know what good governance should look like, at least according to how I view it, but then even if you implement it at current scale, it's not functional. Like none of this stuff is going to work at the current scale we're at with most cryptocurrencies, or maybe even all of them. Right, is that it's just a farce, right? If you set up like a cryptocurrency and then you're either controlling it through development, or you're controlling it through the majority of stake, or you have media influence, and like these things are not decentralized, like truly. Bitcoin isn't truly decentralized. Ethereum isn't truly decentralized. And I'm sorry, Monero isn't either. These things only become truly decentralized at a much bigger scale. And before that, we can't fully rely upon these systems of governance, which is why it's good Monero has such a robust culture and social contract and all of these things around it. That's somewhat the dilemma, right? As you transition between different stages. So, you implement on-chain governance now, you're still relying upon the good graces of the developers you trust and the personalities, you follow. It's also part of human nature, right? And then it's only once we're at like a massive global scale that these things become resilient, because a small cabal of stakeholders can't control it, or because a small group of developers can have a very wide range of what they're capable of without opposition, right, without resistance. So, yeah, I think that's what it comes down to, and I think there's countless examples of DAOs not functioning correctly, and I think that's just part of we're not at a sufficient scale where such a system can even really work. So. It's a bit of a chicken before the egg problem as well, which can be frustrating.
Yeah, I also kind of make a distinction between establishing consensus in terms of governance, just establishing consensus and maintaining consensus. And so in regards to Bitcoin, maintaining consensus is very good at doing that. But in regards to establishing consensus, no chain can do that in really an objective way. And so one of the main goals I feel of decentralization and security is maintaining consensus in a way that doesn't require governance.
Yeah, I think without governance, I think inevitably you just end up controlled. That's the irony of it, right? If you try to limit, like governance is like the mechanisms in place, they're meant to curtail the power of, it's to curtail excessive power, right? So like that's why like governance is there to help preserve decentralization in my view. And in the example of Bitcoin, I would disagree with you there. I think that they can establish consensus in Bitcoin. They they didn't increase the block size limit, and very recently they implemented full RBF, which is something that I think is extremely controversial. If you're not familiar with RBF, it allows for the double spending of unconfirmed transactions, and it used to be optional during the block size debates. They introduced that. It was extremely controversial, and now they've just implemented it as standard in their transactions.
You can still turn it off.
No, it's not. In that, if you run the Bitcoin Core client, then it will all transactions it sends are RBF enabled. So they basically made it not optional. That was the change that happened a few months ago. Sorry?
You can disable the flag to turn it off, but
yeah, I mean, I suppose you could do that, but I just
it's in the config file, but I think it's actually a good thing because being able to do RBF allows you to boost fees on transactions that are potentially being censored by an attacker, and that's the only
from the perspective,
you have,
right, from the perspective of a congested network and from wanting to be a store of value and not being a peer-to-peer electronic cash, I think it makes sense. But to me, it really goes against what Bitcoin was meant to do, which is solve the double spend problem. So standardizing double spends into the protocol, I think for me really goes against, but besides the point, what you think about RBF, it was put into the protocol, right? That was established. And I think, you can at least see the controversy there.
Yeah, I mean, the double spend is solved by having a transaction in a block, not by trusting your transaction to be propagated by nodes. I somewhat disagree. I think that if your network is not congested, then I think zero confirmation transactions are like sufficiently reliable for small transactions, which is very critical if you want to use it like cash. And back in the day, companies were built around this use case, right? Like BitPay was very prominent in terms of being like a payment processor in the middle, and they would take the tiny loss of a double spend, right? Like the likelihood of being double spend in that situation would still be lower than, say, the risk of fraud from credit cards. So like I think the problem is a lot of engineers, they think a lot of time in absolutes, like, oh no, this is not 100% secure, so then we shouldn't use it or shouldn't even develop around it. My view is really, well, no, it's actually sufficiently secure for this very important use case. And I think that was really thrown on the wayside during that time period. And to me, at least, RBF reflects that, because it comes in from like that other perspective, right? But yeah, you're making all fair points, but I think it also it depends upon what you think Bitcoin should be, right? And I can totally respect if you think that it shouldn't be what it was meant to be, so to speak, and it's something else today, and that's what you want it to be, right? I can't argue against your opinion, right? But I feel like from the perspective of what Bitcoin was originally meant to be, that original social contract, I think it runs counter to that.
Let's get, I just want to get other people up that had questions. Ghost, what do you got?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, and good talk so far. I wanted to say I totally disagree with Eric Voskuil's concept that proof of work is secure, and other people on the call that have said you can add more energy. I'm absolutely certain that if a single entity did ever gain 80% control, that it's all over and it's not recoverable from, because the remaining entities can make no profit while that single entity has control. And miners are only in it for profit. If they have every single block they create reversed and dropped, then they'll drop out. And far from people adding energy voluntarily, they won't. The mining base will just drop out. It's all over at that point. And in the Bitcoin case of the nuclear option, no one's actually saying it's going to happen, but it's hypothetically possible that it could happen, not because someone sets up a lot of miners, but simply because 51% of hash rate is in the US now, the country that has already confiscated everyone's gold in 1933. And they could hypothetically, only hypothetically, they could commandeer all the servers and gain not 80%, but over 51% control. And they could choose to reverse blocks on a Tuesday and double spend on a Wednesday and do whatever they like with it. And frankly, it's all over. And all the Voya nodes that Bitcoin has to its credit, got thousands of, couldn't do a thing about it. But that isn't, as Justin well knows, the main problem with Bitcoin right now. It's that it's cutting its income to miners. And it has no mechanism to replace that income with fees. And unlike BCH and this sadly centralized BSV, it cannot possibly replace with fees without killing the Lightning use case for currency by making it too expensive for people to close channels. So I'm not really convinced Bitcoin has a long term. It'll have quite a long term, but inevitably it eventually gets to the point where it needs a tail emission like Monero, something around 0.8%, maybe the 0.75 that it gets to after the next halving. But if it goes below that, its security starts to drop the moment price doesn't double, and price cannot double indefinitely because we get to more than the GDP of the world pretty rapidly. It's just not a credible scenario to go beyond, as we know, 3 times the price of gold by 2044. It's just not feasible. And then a final third point, Justin, if I just made one more point, the concept of centralization, that no currency can survive if it has a creeping tendency towards centralization. You're correct on saying none is really fully decentralized until we're on a vastly bigger scale. But starting from today, any currency that trends towards centralization, as Bitcoin is doing, with the hash rate increasingly going to mega server farms, it will not survive long term. It will centralize. It trends towards centralization, and that's caused by fees. If it's in a validator's interest to work at scale with economies of scale, they will centralize.
Well said, man. I agree, and I appreciate you jumping on it. And it's so nice to hear your voice. I always see you commenting on a lot of my threads, and like this, some Bitcoin maxi will say something really silly, and then you would be like, that's not a rebuttal, that's not an argument. I love it. As someone with a philosophy background, that just really gets me going. I would just thanks for all of that, you know. And really awesome to have you here on the Twitter Spaces. Good stuff.
Brett, I see you giggling over there. Let's get you up here. What do you got to say?
I just thought it was funny. I actually am in agreement with both Ghost and Justin here. My question actually pertains to something else that Justin brought up earlier. One, just kind of a random note, because I noticed you threw out the $60 per transaction figure for Bitcoin for scaling, and I was kind of curious how you actually, and not for scaling, but for maintaining security, and I was curious on how you came to that number. And then another one I wanted to peel back some layers on the slashing, but I want to let you answer the first one first.
Sure, great. Nice chatting with you again. So it's been a while since I did the calculation, so it's probably off a little bit. But basically you look at, like, in order to maintain current security, right, without the, say, inflation, right? How many transaction fees would you need, right? And you can look at that because there's only so many transactions that fit in a single block, right? And we know how much miners are being paid now, so you can just remove the Coinbase reward and then see how high the fees need to be. Or you could factor in like how high, include the Coinbase reward from like 11 years ago, right? And then basically you get your figure in terms of how, and that's assuming price stays the same, and that's assuming, a few other things. But basically then you can get to a number of like how high do the transaction fees need to be for that to actually have the same security as it does today. And arguably it has too much security today, right? You could make that argument. But you have to make some trade-offs to come up with a single figure like that. But that's more or less the methodology that I came up with.
And that's saying that secure, it's overly secure now is basically saying that it's overpriced for its actual usage, right? That's what that infers.
No, I don't think that's. Well, yes, it's overpriced in terms of its cost to it, or it's like I think there's a threshold somewhere where it becomes profitable to attack. So then you want to think of like scenarios of like, okay, if I sent $50 million to an exchange, and how much, mining power, would I need to say double spend that transaction? And how much does that mining power cost? Can I triple my money if if the mining power only cost me 10 million to 51% the network, right? That's the scenario you're talking to. So you can kind of use, a scenario like that to kind of think about what the cost to attack actually, what the minimum cost to attack should be.
Interesting. I know
I just worked it out. It's $71.75 is the current Coinbase mining reward per transaction at 3.6 CPS.
There you go. Then my estimate was under a bit.
I love it. And you had mentioned some of the comparisons earlier between proof of stake and proof of work. And one thing that wasn't mentioned that I think is important is just the economies of scale that come into play, right? Like as you accumulate more wealth to buy miners, you can do it more cheaply than your competitors, right? So once you get to the upper echelon there, becomes you're just straight up making more for your costs as opposed to someone just trying to plug into the network. But that wasn't the question I was really interested in. Was your thought on slashing versus alternative mechanisms for handling repercussions within a network? I know obviously Cardano, they rely on like the Nash principle. I know your personal opinion of Cardano, but are you aware of any other mechanisms that are out there besides strictly slashing, or just like the stateful operators getting their supporters not delegated to?
Yeah, I do have mixed feelings about slashing. Quite strong mixed feelings actually, because it is kind of, is that messing with property rights? Even though there is still another chain on the other hand where there is preserved. I'm almost tempted to say if that happens, it's just failed, right? Like if like a little bit like if Bitcoin gets attacked by an 80% hash rate, then it's just failed, right? I'm tempted to say the same thing for proof of stake and just, have the belief that at scale it won't fail, just like how some might have the belief Bitcoin won't fail, right? Or at least a belief based on some foundations and understanding at least. But yeah, that's so I don't know of any other way to solve. Is this the nothing at stake problem?
Yes.
No, not. Yeah, somewhat. It's somewhat the nothing at stake problem. I never thought the nothing at stake problem was really a problem, personally. But the thing about slashing is that there's a trade-off there. It's I'm conflicted about the idea of like some central party having a list of addresses of who they decide to like destroy their coins. Like that sets a really dangerous precedent, right? So we might be better off just not having that at all. But, keep in mind, this is only when the system has already failed, essentially, right? And, So that's where kind of that nuclear option, hey, if you're dead anyway, then you might as well do this and still be a lot better off and recover, right? And that also serves as a disincentive for the attack to happen in the first place, in a like game theoretical sense. So yeah, that's where I stand on slashing. But yeah, you can tell I've got some conflicting feelings on it. It's good to keep in mind this is only in like the most extreme scenario, like when like some people were talking about slashing with the recent OFAC stuff, like that to me was madness, right? I was like, that's absolutely terrible. Like, but that also brings up a good point. Actually, I wanted to mention this in regards to what Ghost Band said earlier as well. That actually proof of work is more vulnerable to that type of OFAC censorship, though. Even though obviously blockchains are very resilient, because it just takes one block to go through in order for that censorship to be routed around, right? That's why I always thought the OFAC thing with Ethereum was really a non-issue. I think I veered off topic a little bit there.
No, good stuff. I'm just going to chime in real quick. Anybody that's in this room, check out monerotopia.com. We have a Monero/Privacy Tech conference coming up in May in Mexico City. And there will be a panel on proof of work versus proof of stake. Actually, trying to maybe cajole Justin into coming down there and sitting on the panel. I'll hit him up outside of this. It is a beautiful place, the Roma district of Mexico City. I'll see what I can do in cajoling him. Let's get Andy up here. I don't think you spoke yet, Andy. Did you? I see you had a question. I don't think we had you up here, did we?
Yeah, but here's another. Do you have any takes on BSV, BCH?
Oh yeah, I got lots of takes on that. So I, like a good Bitcoiner, at least from my perspective, I supported BCH. I actually supported Bitcoin XP, Bitcoin Classic, Bitcoin Unlimited. I helped actually with some of the stuff around Bitcoin Unlimited, and later was a supporter of Bitcoin Cash. But I got out before the most recent split. So just to fill everyone in on the history, BCH split off from Bitcoin, BSV split off from BCH, and then what's it called? So that's how much it's not in my mind. Then eCash split off from BCH later down the line. And to me, this was just a massive example of a failure of governance. That's what like really informs my my theories today. I wrote my free stage theory on or free stage model on governance, on Bitcoin governance, very much inspired and like guided by this, and like saying what the solution to this is. And that's where I also identified this lack of long-term incentive around miners, and also the vulnerability of development teams just to become captured. I mean, that recent split was unbelievable. Like the main developer ended up wanting to tax part of the inflation and send it directly to a hard-coded address to himself. I thought that was ridiculous. And, the BCH did a good job, community did a good job kind of kicking him out. And I really respect those guys. I really think that they really represent that vision, that original Bitcoin vision, and they're really doing something really important there. But, as a critical thinker, as an investor, I see flaws with that, and I've moved on, and that I now really do look for proof of stake and Turing completeness. So that means I don't really fit with BCH anymore in the way my thinking has evolved.
So even if they fix the governance concerns, the sort of structure you still don't believe is more scalable or more of a competitor?
No, it's just more scalable. It's far more scalable, right? BCH, Monero, these things can scale to the moon, right? No problem. But as I said earlier, I just think Turing complete smart contracts should also be included in the layer 1. And in order to do that, you need to do even more advanced scaling techniques, right? So, yeah, and that's so for me, the issue was really more around proof of work. And that's why I've moved on myself from proof of work. And I'll tell you the specific reasoning for it, right? In my free stage theory on governance, at least, I believe the miners needed to so the way I see it is there's 3 stages of decision making in Nakamoto consensus, right? You have, at least in the way I view it should be, right? You have the development team, so the client implementation, that's stage 1. And you need multiple client implementations. Otherwise, it's just a one-party system. You have a vote and you have one choice on the ballot, right? That doesn't. I can't accept that, so to speak. So you have multiple client implementation. BCH has that, right? And then the miners, the validators, right? They choose between the different options, right? And then they would have this emergence on the best option, right? And then if that ends up being a bad option or ends up being a controversial decision one way or another, not even to their own fault, then there's a split, right? And then the split is like the 3rd stage. That's the market. The market acts as like the 3rd stage of governance, where it's ultimately decided by the market, right? That's what determines which has the most value, right? And there's all sorts of edge cases in terms of exchanges and politics and all this stuff. But for me, it went wrong at 2 places. Actually, I think it also went wrong in terms of the miners are very mercantile in nature for the most part. Like most miners have like a 5-year time horizon, right? Because you have electricity contracts, you have the limited lifespan of your equipment, and a lot of them are very mercantile in nature and just want to get in and they want to get out and they want to make a profit. And so if on occasion you're faced with a choice, right? You're faced with a choice of do we not rock the boat now, right? And then everything will be clear for the next 5 years, or do we make a controversial decision that's actually more beneficial long term, right? And I think their miners lack a good long term incentive. And that's why in proof of stake, we have the ability to lock coins. And that to me solves the long term incentive problem.
Let's just let Aon quickly respond, and then I'll get Kiwi up here and Quinn, and then we'll probably close it out after that. Go ahead, Aon.
I'll try and make it quick, but yeah, the idea, like you're saying, BCH can scale endlessly, and I think Ghost brought up BCH has the fee incentive thing covered. I don't see how either of those things are possible. I mean, BSV claimed the same thing about gigabyte blocks, and now exchanges are dropping their node because they can't afford to run a node because nodes are 100 terabytes.
All right. So sorry, I didn't address BSV. I'll just address that, and you can.
Well, no, you said BCH and Monero, and they could all scale. I mean, block scaling is not a solution to scale logarithmically.
I believe it is. I really do believe it is. And look, in the case of BSV, right, I've always been a.
How could someone run a node?
Right, let me just explain. I've never supported BSV, okay, and I was there when they split off, and I've met Craig Wright on multiple occasions. He's actually quite charming in person, but I still, anyway, my point is that I've always been a moderate when it comes to this debate. So I disagreed with Bitcoin and its 1 megabyte block size limit, and I thought that's just ridiculous. And I also disagree with BSV with its unbound block sizes or gigabyte blocks. I also think that's ridiculous because there are limits, right, in the universe, and you have a fee market that can regulate that without a block size limit being hit, right? So if we really ask the question now, what is sustainable, right? Bitcoin Cash can scale today up to 32 megabytes. Oh, it's 64 now. That's like twice the capacity of PayPal, right? And you're not going to get all of that demand instant. You're not going to get all of that usage instantly. It's gradually over time. So what you need to do is you just need to be able to keep your capacity above demand. That doesn't mean we have gigabyte blocks today, right? And if we do hit a limit, that's unfortunate, and then the fee market kicks in, like a real technical limit, right? But we're talking about, what a 10-year-old laptop running optimized Bitcoin code can basically support the Visa network today. I don't think that that's too big. And I'm not against a bit of pruning and having separate archival nodes either in the grand scheme of things. And I agree with the BSV guys on another thing as well. I don't think that individuals running nodes are as important in the system as a lot of people make it out to be. I think what matters more is the distribution of mining power, and it's actually the nodes, the pool nodes, that that things need to be optimized for from a scaling perspective. Yeah. Sorry, I'll give you a chance to respond. That was
let's let Aon quickly respond, and then Kiwi and Quinn.
Yeah, I mean, you said you can't predict demand, and yeah, you can't predict demand. That's kind of a problem where demand can kick up, and then what do? You just keep increasing the blocks, or do you let the fees rise? And
no, I mean, that's the thing.
What's your opinion
up to technical limits, right? So it's like you let the demand fill up the blocks up to when you reach technical limits. I'm just saying the technical limits are actually really high right now. We can afford a lot of capacities on these blockchains.
Do you consider block propagation attacks in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Block propagation is actually really critical in that.
Yeah, you make it sound like it's like no big deal, but there's a lot of nuance that I don't think people realize. Block propagation is one. So.
Right, but the pools are like communicating directly with each other, like through secondary networks in most cases, right? And they're running compression over those blocks, and they're having lightning fast communication.
Not
right?
that I'm aware of. I know there was attempts on Bitcoin to have these secondary networks, but they just turned into another consensus layer that actually.
That's currently the case in Bitcoin. I'm sure of that. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's Matt Corallo. His secondary networks on top.
That's the defunct project. There's no one running it.
The miners are still using it, right?
No,
they're using a different network.
Maintained.
Okay. Guess I'm not in the loop, but I'm sure they must be using a different network, or for a time they were. I know that for a fact, right? So that's how you would, that helps block propagation along a lot already, right?
I mean, it just becomes another consensus layer, because if you're compressing blocks, they need to be decompressed, and they need to be propagated in some fashion that's different than the Bitcoin network's propagation. So.
Right, but even using the Bitcoin's network propagation, and you can easily scale to really large blocks. Like 64 megabytes is a massive amount of capacity, right? I'm not saying we can do gigabyte blocks, right? I agree with you. That's not sensible. But 64 megabytes is like enough to solve the security dilemma, right? It becomes sustainable based on economic activity and the amount of lives you change. I mean, so that many people actually using cryptocurrency as money, that's what we should want. And if that creates a kind of bottleneck that you can't run it on your Raspberry Pi and you need a 10-year-old laptop instead, I think that's fine. I don't think that's really a problem.
That the adoption will come just because there's big blocks. I mean, that's the route BCH is going, and adoption, it's not getting more usage. It's less usage.
Right, because it's not winning. Because I think a lot of people thought that the market would route around Bitcoin towards Bitcoin Cash, right? People thought that. And I think what actually happened is the market routed around Bitcoin towards things like Ethereum, right? And Monero to a certain extent, and others, right? But I think that's what actually happened.
I won't take up all your time. Sorry.
Yeah,
Great talking with you,
thank you.
Justin.
That was super interesting. I really enjoyed that discussion. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Aon. Thanks for doing that. Kiwi, let's get you up here, and then Quinn.
Hey guys. Pretty awesome discussion. It always cracks me up. Well, you said before you like the philosophical side of how things move, and I think what I find absolutely fascinating about the space is the fact that Bitcoin was built to be a massive step forward, a beta towards a system that will work, and to set up something that people could work from for the future. And there is so much resistance to any change or building forward for a lot of people who are involved in those systems, which is why. I mean, that just frustrates the hell out of me that it was literally built to give us a way forward, to show us how things could be done. And there's so many people, you can't change this, you can't change that. And what you guys are discussing now and saying, well, some of these things need to be changed and improved and bettered. Thank God. It's nice to hear people talking about it and getting forward on that. So philosophical view. Yeah, I love what you guys are talking about here. I did hear you say before you weren't too keen on the Cardano thing. I think Brad said you were you had a bit of a poor viewpoint on that by the sound of it. May I ask why in a brief overview?
Sure, very brief, and it's been a while. I promised the Cardano community to wait for their next update before I did my next critique. I'm still waiting for that one, but so my old critiques were based on a lot of the stuff around the UTXO model. I just felt like I just don't feel like the UTXO model is a major advantage over a account-based model. I think from a user experience, it's more confusing, and also really it creates a bunch of problems in terms of composability and interoperability. So yeah, which might be solved, or are partially solved as far as I understand. My other issue was just in terms of pacing. Yeah, my other critique is really in terms of. Yeah, and my other issue with Cardano was really like, look, Cardano, does it predate Ethereum in terms of launch? It's very old. It's been around for a long time. And I understand. Yeah, that's right. That's when Ethereum launched, right? So it's been around for just as long as Ethereum. I mean, I don't think it's been in development for as long, to be fair, but I just think the pace of innovation, the pace of change is very slow, and it's part of what I understand that the Cardano community really sees this as like academic-paced innovation, that therefore their work is more rigorous, and it goes through this peer review process and all of these things, right? But I just feel like as an investor and as like a critical thinker and as wanting cryptocurrencies to be competitive in this market, I just feel like Cardano development is really slow if you look at like what features does it have and what features does it not have, and over time that's been. May I correct the thinking
line there quickly?
Please. Sure.
Yes, you are right. The initial development term and getting things up and running was very, very slow. However, what people missed about the way Cardano is building, they aren't building one feature at a time. They are parallel building several features simultaneously. So yes, the rollout times are separate. So, they have that 6 month to year gapping on getting these features out. However, most of the features that we're seeing rolled out have been in progress being built simultaneously beside the systems that were already being built. So the stepping up of the build out time is actually starting to increase like quite dramatically now that these systems are coming to fruition.
Yeah, and I hope that's true, because from what I understand so far about Cardano's design, I mentioned before all my checkboxes in terms of what I'm looking for. Cardano actually has a lot of those. It's planning to do on-chain governance, right? It's planning to implement. Its scaling roadmap is interesting to me. As far as I understand, I'm not 100% certain about it, but it's the way it scales through Hydra and the Hydra heads, because I see this as a native implementation of rollups. They're rollups essentially, aren't they?
Actually, think Hydra is essentially Lightning Network, but advanced even more. They've taken the best features of several of that. It's a peer-to-peer overlay, but they also have the scalability for Cardano. Truly comes from the sidechain model, which takes the delegation of the primary chain and uses that as the security for the side chains that will be built to handle. And that
I'm interested in that. Yeah, I'm interested in that sidechain model, right? Actually, because I think that's what I was referring to. And the idea, it's because, and I mentioned this earlier, because the main validators, the main Cardano validators, are basically being put onto this randomized set on different sidechains, right? In my eyes, that's monolithic scaling through execution sharding. I think that's effectively the same thing. I know there's a difference in like terminology here, but in terms of why I care about that monolithic approach to sharding, I think that actually achieves it. And that is really exciting to me, because that's one of the things I'm really looking for in a cryptocurrency, right? So I just think I just want to see more of it actually implemented. And it just, Cardano doesn't have a great track record in terms of timelines and implementing things.
The sidechain model entered testnet a couple of weeks back. They're expecting to have the first couple of sidechains active and working later this year. So that'll be something you can look forward to doing a bit of investigation.
Looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, that's my very short summary of Cardano, and some of the things I like and don't like about it.
Thank you very much. It's actually a good point of view. No, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, let's quickly get Quinn up here. Quinn, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll just try to be quick here. First and foremost, I didn't think I was going to agree with Justin on anything because I disagreed with a lot of what I heard when I first came in here. And I came in late, but ironically, I could not agree more about Cardano. I'm sorry to Kiwi and all the Cardano, fans, Cult of Charles and all that, but let's be real. As a layer one, there's better options. There's a lot of competitive options out there. It's Tezos, there's Algo, there's a lot of stuff. I'm not going to rehash. You guys just, spend a lot of time there. People's eyes glaze over. But yeah, if you like Cardano, it's fine. But you don't just sell the room on Cardano just because you like it. I'll just put it that way. Anyway, my sort of comment / question is more of a thing going back to the titular subject of Bitcoin. I see this, and I know this is sort of the dirty, elephant in the room, but I'm going to say it. I am in this space for the money go up and the value prop. And so beyond the practicality and, the Web3 of it all, which, as I think it's already been established, BTC is not really a Web3 thing. It's more just a store of value. When people like Ghost, I'm sure he's already, giving you guys a spiel about, his perspective that it's going to go down, this and that. I don't know if that really matches up with reality because essentially we have a deflationary asset. I use the Rembrandt analogy, the analogy like artwork. I know that has comparisons to NFTs and the art use case. I'm not trying to stir up that whole thing, but basically, if a deflationary asset that eventually is going to stop being presented, stop being discovered, stop being produced, just exists and already has a set amount of value and a floor. We don't know exactly what that floor is. It's been up and down. It's been very volatile. The whole market's been very volatile. But to say that it's going to go to zero when people have already bought up tons, there are a bunch of people who plan on never selling or basically never selling, I just don't know that that makes sense. I understand that there are going to be a lot of periods of volatility. It could go even further down than it already is right now. Certainly it's on rebound, all markets on rebound. But to say that it's going to go to zero, because that's really what we're talking about, in part when we say it's going to fail. Other things are, implicit in that, accusation or polemic, but basically it's going to lose all its value. I just don't know what that matches up when it's a deflationary asset that a lot of people are going to hold forever. And eventually we're not going to see anymore. And that's basically my comment.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, first of all, I'm pretty sure I've never said that BTC will go to zero. I believe it will lose its dominance because I just don't see it as being competitive, right? And in terms of it being a deflationary asset, I would put that into question based on what I said earlier in the podcast as well, that its security model is not sustainable. So the only way that it remains secure is actually if it becomes inflationary. And I think when that happens, I just can't see it competing against cryptocurrencies that are truly deflationary and are truly secure and that are, have privacy features like Monero, I just don't see how that can, how can the worst cryptocurrency stay at number one forever? That doesn't make any sense to me. Something that is inflationary, something with limited capacity.
I'm going to disagree with worst, but I appreciate it. Maybe the simplest would be a better way of putting it, but fair enough. I feel you.
Yeah. I've noticed people get triggered when I say the worst. I think I mean worst by in terms of its design.
Least nuanced, least complicated, simplest. You can just say it's the simplest. That is a true statement. Yeah. It's the simplest crypto out there, for sure.
Yeah, but that could be seen as a compliment, right? Depending on your perspective. But I
you can't
I do agree though.
Can't do it.
No, I can't.
You can't give it up.
No, but I agree with you. If I separately, I can agree with you that Bitcoin is the simplest design, and I think the simplest design didn't work. So now we have to add more complexity to it, and now that might not work, and that fails, and then we have to add more complexity to design, and this is how we might have to iterate. And this might take a few decades. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you for taking my question and comment.
It was a pleasure. It was a great question. Thank you.
All right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Justin's been very generous with his time doing the interview and then sticking around for a long Q&A. Greatly appreciate it, man. Love your demeanor, man. You're very chill. You're very cool. Matter of fact, you don't get emotional, which is something a lot of people lack in this space. So appreciate that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And thanks for inviting me. This was great.
Yeah, man. It was great having you, and hopefully maybe we'll be chatting again soon sometime. And I'm honest about trying to cajole you into coming down to Mexico. I'll DM you and see what I can do.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you, everybody, for listening in. We do these Monero Talks once a week, and just keep a lookout. You can follow Monero at Monero Talk, and you'll be notified when the next one will be. We record them live. We let people ask questions at the end, and then we post the interviews afterwards. Thank you, guys. Cheers. Everybody have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. We release new episodes every week. You can find and subscribe to our show on YouTube, Odyssey, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Go to monerotalk.live to subscribe for a full list of places where you can watch and listen. If you want to interact with us, guests, or other podcast listeners, you can follow us on Twitter. And please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps people find the show, and we are always happy to read them. So thanks so much, and we look forward to being back next week.